The sound of squealing tires and revving engines cut through the morning air as Grace Cooper stepped off the curb. 1 second she was checking her watch, late for a meeting. The next, a motorcycle was barreling toward her, its rider seemingly oblivious to her presence. Time slowed. Her body froze. But before the inevitable impact, a powerful force yanked her backward. Her coffee cup flew from her hand as she tumbled against someone solid and warm. The motorcycle whizzed by, missing her by inches, the wind from its passing ruffling her hair as she found herself looking up into the most intense blue eyes she'd ever seen. "Are you okay?" The deep voice belonged to the man who'd pulled her to safety, his strong arm still steadying her. His face was etched with concern, brow furrowed beneath dark hair that had a slight curl to it. Yes," Grace stammered, heart pounding so hard she was sure he could feel it. "Thank you. I didn't see it coming." "People need to watch where they are going," he said, his eyes tracking the motorcycle as it disappeared around a corner. "Especially on these streets." Grace nodded, trying to regain her composure. She was suddenly aware that she was still pressed against this stranger's chest, his hands on her arms. She pulled back slightly, straightening her blouse. "I'm Grace," she said, offering her hand. "Grace Cooper, and you are Oliver Blackwell." He shook her hand, his grip firm but gentle. "Are you sure you're all right? That was a close call." "I'm fine, just a bit shaken." She glanced down at her empty hand. "And minus 1 cup of coffee." Oliver's mouth quirked up in a half-smile that transformed his serious face. "Let me buy you another." "It's the least I can do after tackling you on a public sidewalk. You saved me from being hit by a motorcycle." "I think I'm the one who owes you," Grace countered. "How about we call it even over coffee?" Oliver suggested, checking his watch, a subtle but unmistakably expensive timepiece that caught the morning light. Grace hesitated. She was already late for her meeting at the gallery, where she worked as a curator. But looking at Oliver, tall, confident, dressed in what she now realized was an impeccably tailored suit, she found herself nodding. "I'd like that, but I have a meeting I'm already late for." She bit her lip, torn between responsibility and the inexplicable pull she felt toward this stranger. "Another time, then." Something in his voice suggested he wasn't used to being turned down. Grace surprised herself by pulling out a business card from her purse. "Call me. We can arrange that coffee." Oliver took the card, studying it for a moment. "Art curator at Luminance Gallery. Impressive." "It's just a small place in Chelsea," she said modestly. "I know it," he replied, tucking her card into his jacket pocket. "I'll call you Grace Cooper." With a nod, he stepped back, and Grace realized he was letting her go on her way. She smiled, thanked him again, and hurried toward the gallery, her heart still racing, though she wasn't sure if it was from the near accident or the encounter with the mysterious Oliver Blackwell. It wasn't until she was sitting in her meeting, half listening to her boss discuss the upcoming exhibition, that she realized she hadn't asked what Oliver did for a living. There was something about him, though, his confidence, that watch, the quality of his suit that suggested success. She found herself hoping he would actually call. 3 days passed before Grace's phone rang with an unknown number. She was in the midst of cataloging new pieces for the gallery's spring exhibition, surrounded by packing materials and information sheets. "Grace Cooper," she answered professionally, wedging the phone between her ear and shoulder as she continued unwrapping a delicate glass sculpture. "Grace, it's Oliver. Oliver Blackwell." Her hand stilled on the bubble wrap. "Oliver, hello." She tried to keep her voice casual, though her pulse had quickened at the sound of his voice. "I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time," he said. "No, just unpacking some new pieces." She set the sculpture down carefully. "How are you?" "Better now," he replied, and she could hear the smile in his voice. I was wondering if that rain check on coffee is still available. Grace found herself smiling too. It is. How about tomorrow? There's a place called Artisan's Brew on West 4th that makes an excellent pour-over. I know it. Tomorrow works. Say 9, perfect. I'll meet you there. After they hung up, Grace realized she'd been grinning at nothing. It had been a while since she'd felt this kind of anticipation over a simple coffee date. Not that it was a date, she reminded herself. It was a thank-you coffee with a man who'd saved her from potential injury. Nothing more. But as she selected her outfit the next morning, a casual but flattering emerald green dress that brought out her eyes, Grace acknowledged to herself that she was hoping for something more. Artisan's Brew was busy but not crowded when she arrived. Oliver was already there, standing as soon as he saw her enter. He wore dark jeans and a light blue button-down shirt that made his eyes even more striking than she remembered. "You found it," he said, smiling as she approached. "I've been here before. Their lavender latte is worth the extra $1, she replied, settling into the chair he pulled out for her. "Is that what you're having?" When she nodded, Oliver signaled to a barista who came over immediately. "A lavender latte for the lady, and I'll have a black coffee, please." "Coming right up, Mr. Blackwell," the barista said with a nod that bordered on deferential. Grace raised an eyebrow as the barista walked away. "You're a regular." "I own a few businesses in the area," Oliver said with a casual shrug that didn't quite match the intensity in his eyes. "You get to know people." "What kind of businesses?" Grace asked, genuinely curious. "Varied interests. Property development, renewable energy, some tech startups." He leaned back slightly. "But I'd rather hear about your work. Luminance Gallery has an impressive reputation for featuring emerging artists." Grace lit up at the mention of her work. "We try to balance established names with new talent. It's a delicate ecosystem, but when it works, it's magic." She paused as their coffees arrived. "Do you collect art?" "I do," Oliver replied, taking a sip of his coffee. "Though I admit my knowledge isn't as refined as I'd like it to be. I know what moves me, but I couldn't tell you why a particular brushstroke technique is revolutionary." "That's actually a pure way to appreciate art," Grace said. "Sometimes too much technical knowledge gets in the way of emotional connection." They fell into easy conversation, jumping from art to travel to books they'd both read. Grace found herself laughing more than she had in months. Oliver was surprisingly funny beneath his serious exterior, and he listened to her with genuine interest, asking follow-up questions that showed he was truly engaged. It wasn't until she glanced at her watch that Grace realized they'd been talking for almost 2 hours. "Oh, I'm supposed to be at the gallery in 15 minutes. I've kept you too long," Oliver said, looking apologetic. "No, not at all. I lost track of time." Grace gathered her purse. This was nice. Oliver stood as she did. "It was. Could we do it again? Perhaps dinner this time?" Grace felt a flutter in her chest. "I'd like that. Friday. I know a place in the West Village that makes the best risotto you've ever tasted." "Friday works," she agreed, feeling a warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the coffee. As she hurried to the gallery, Grace couldn't help but smile. There was something about Oliver Blackwell that intrigued her, something beyond his good looks and charm. She wanted to know more about him, to understand what drove someone who seemed to have achieved so much at a relatively young age. What Grace didn't know as she catalogued paintings that afternoon was that Oliver Blackwell wasn't just someone who owned a few businesses. The name Blackwell was attached to one of the largest private investment firms in the country, with holdings that stretched across continents. Oliver Blackwell wasn't just successful, he was a billionaire several times over. And he couldn't stop thinking about the art curator with the bright eyes and infectious laugh, who hadn't seemed the least bit impressed by him. Friday evening arrived with a light spring rain that left the city streets gleaming under the streetlights. Grace had chosen a simple black dress with a statement necklace, a handcrafted piece she'd bought from an artist at the gallery. She'd spent more time on her makeup than usual, applying a subtle smoky eye that enhanced her green eyes. Oliver had texted the restaurant's address, a discreet place tucked away on a quiet street. When she arrived, the maitre d' greeted her by name before she could even speak. "Miss Cooper, welcome. Mr. Blackwell is already seated. Please follow me." The restaurant was intimate, with soft lighting and well-spaced tables that allowed for private conversation. Oliver stood as she approached, his eyes taking in her appearance with obvious appreciation. "Grace, you look beautiful," he said, coming around to pull out her chair. "Thank you," she replied, feeling a blush creep up her neck. "This place is lovely. I thought you'd like it. The chef is a friend he trained in Bologna before opening here." A waiter appeared immediately with a bottle of wine. "The Barolo you requested, Mr. Blackwell." Oliver nodded. "Would you like to taste it?" he asked Grace. "Please," she said, watching as the waiter poured a small amount into her glass. She swirled it, inhaled its aroma, and took a sip. The wine was exquisite, rich and complex. "It's perfect." As the waiter filled their glasses, Grace noticed the deferential way the staff treated Oliver. It was subtle, but unmistakable, the kind of treatment reserved for very important clientele. "So," she said once they were alone, "tell me more about these varied interests of yours. Property development and renewable energy sound like an unusual combination." Oliver's lips quirked up. "I believe in diversification and in investing in things that matter." He took a sip of his wine. "My company, Blackwell Investments, has a broad portfolio, but we're increasingly focused on sustainable development and clean energy. We're currently working on a major project in upstate New York, a zero-carbon community with self-sustaining power generation." "That sounds impressive," Grace said. "Is Blackwell Investments large?" A subtle smile played across Oliver's face. "We do all right." Something in his tone made Grace reach for her phone. She typed quickly, her eyes widening as search results appeared. She looked up at him, realization dawning. "You're Oliver Blackwell." "As in Forbes 30 under 40. As in the Blackwell Foundation that donated $50 million to climate research last year." She set her phone down, staring at him. "You're not just successful, you're just a guy having dinner with a beautiful woman," he finished for her, his expression guarded. Grace took a deep breath. "Why didn't you tell me? Would it have made a difference?" His blue eyes studied her intently. I don't know," she admitted, "but it feels like a pretty significant detail to omit. In my experience, once people know who I am, what I have, everything changes. The conversation becomes about my money, not about me." There was a weariness in his voice that made Grace's indignation soften. "These past few days, talking with you, have been the most normal I've felt in years. You liked me for me, not for what I could do for you or what I could buy." Grace considered this. She thought about how easy their conversation had been, how genuinely interested he'd seemed in her work and her thoughts. He hadn't tried to impress her with his wealth or status. "I understand," she said finally. "But moving forward, no more significant omissions, okay? I'd like to get to know the real Oliver Blackwell." Relief washed over his features. "I'd like that too." He raised his glass. To honesty," she echoed, clinking her glass against his. The rest of dinner passed in a blur of extraordinary food, lively conversation, and laughter. Oliver told her about growing up as the only son of a finance mogul, the pressure to follow in his father's footsteps, and how he'd eventually found his own path by focusing on sustainable investments. Grace shared stories of her middle-class upbringing in Connecticut, her passion for art that had led her to NYU, and her dream of someday opening her own gallery featuring undiscovered female artists. "That's a worthy goal," Oliver said as they finished their dessert, a decadent tiramisu that the chef had personally prepared for them. "What's stopping you?" "The usual. Money, connections, a space that wouldn't bankrupt me before I could establish a reputation." She shrugged. "But I'm saving and I'm building my network through luminance. It'll happen eventually." "I have no doubt," Oliver said, his eyes warm with admiration. "You have passion and vision. Those are rare qualities." After dinner, Oliver suggested a walk despite the light drizzle. "I have an umbrella," he said, "and the West Village is beautiful in the rain." They strolled through the quiet streets, sharing the large umbrella, their shoulders occasionally brushing. The intimacy of being huddled together against the gentle rain created a bubble around them, separating them from the rest of the city. "Thank you for tonight," Grace said as they paused by a small park. "For dinner, and for being honest with me." "Thank you for giving me a chance to explain," Oliver replied, turning to face her. In the soft glow of the streetlights with raindrops glistening in her hair, she looked ethereal. "I'd like to see you again, Grace." "I'd like that too," she said softly. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. But Grace found herself moving toward him, drawn by a force she couldn't explain. Their lips met in a gentle kiss that quickly deepened, his free arm wrapping around her waist as the umbrella sheltered them from the world. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathless. Oliver's eyes were dark with desire, but there was something else there too, a vulnerability that touched Grace deeply. "I should get you home," he said, his voice rough. "It's getting late." Grace nodded, though she wasn't ready for the evening to end. "I live in the East Village. It's not far. I'll walk you." They made their way across town, talking quietly, their hands finding each other beneath the umbrella. When they reached her building, a pre-war walk-up that was charming but definitely showed its age, Grace felt suddenly self-conscious. "It's not much compared to what you're probably used to," she said, gesturing to the building. "It's perfect," Oliver replied, and the sincerity in his voice made her believe him. He leaned down for another kiss, this one briefer but no less affecting. "Good night, Grace Cooper. I'll call you tomorrow." "Good night, Oliver." She watched him walk away, his tall figure receding into the rainy night, before climbing the 4 flights to her apartment. As she got ready for bed, Grace tried to process the evening. She just had dinner and shared kisses with a billionaire, a man who could buy her building without blinking. It was surreal. But what stuck with her wasn't Oliver's wealth. It was the way he'd listened to her talk about art, the passion in his voice when he described his sustainable development projects, the vulnerability in his eyes when he'd admitted his fear that people only wanted him for his money. As she drifted off to sleep, Grace realized that despite the revelation of his status, she was falling for the man, not the billionaire. And that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. Oliver called the next day, as promised, and the day after that. They fell into a rhythm of daily calls and frequent dates over the next few weeks. Oliver took her to hidden gem restaurants, to a private viewing at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, to a concert where they sat in a private box. But Grace's favorite evenings were the simpler ones, walking through Central Park, cooking dinner at her apartment, talking for hours about everything and nothing. She learned that despite his wealth, Oliver had simple tastes in many things. He preferred a home-cooked meal to a fancy restaurant, enjoyed action movies as much as foreign films, and had a secret love for old-school hip-hop that made her laugh with delight when he revealed it. She also learned that his wealth created complications she'd never considered. Paparazzi occasionally followed them, resulting in a few blurry photos appearing in gossip columns with headlines like, Blackwell heir steps out with mystery woman. Oliver was recognized everywhere they went, leading to interrupted meals and constant networking, even when he clearly wanted to be left alone. And there were the women who approached him openly, even when Grace was clearly with him, offering business cards and suggestive smiles that made Grace's blood boil. "It doesn't mean anything," Oliver assured her after one particularly brazen encounter at a charity gala he'd invited her to. "That's exactly what I was talking about. People see the bank account, not the person." "It's still infuriating," Grace muttered, smoothing down her borrowed gown, a stunning Dior piece that Oliver's personal shopper had sent over, insisting it would be perfect for the event. She'd initially resisted, uncomfortable with such an expensive gift, but Oliver had convinced her it was merely appropriate attire for an event he'd invited her to. "You're cute when you're jealous," he teased, pulling her closer on the terrace where they'd escaped for a moment of privacy. "I'm not jealous, I'm territorial," she corrected, making him laugh. "Well, you have nothing to worry about," he said, his voice dropping to a more serious tone. "I've never felt this way about anyone, Grace. You really see me. Do you know how rare that is?" The sincerity in his eyes made her heart swell. "I'm falling in love with you, Oliver Blackwell," she admitted, the words slipping out before she could stop them, his face transformed with joy. "I'm already there," he replied, cupping her face in his hands. "I love you, Grace Cooper." Their kiss was interrupted by a camera flash. Oliver sighed, resting his forehead against hers. "And that will be in tomorrow's papers. I'm sorry." "Don't be," she said, surprised to find she meant it. "Let them take pictures. I'm not ashamed of loving you." His answering smile was worth any invasion of privacy. The next day, as predicted, their kiss was splashed across a gossip site with the headline, "Blackwell Billions Find Love. Reclusive Tycoon's Public Display of Affection." Grace's phone buzzed constantly with texts from friends and co-workers who'd recognized her. "You're dating Oliver Blackwell." Her best friend Melissa texted, followed by a string of shocked emojis. "The actual billionaire. Call me immediately." Grace had been keeping the relationship relatively quiet, not ready to face the inevitable questions and assumptions. But now the choice had been taken from her. She spent the day fielding calls and deflecting probing questions at the gallery, where even her usually art-focused boss was suddenly interested in her personal life. "If this brings more attention to the gallery, that's not a bad thing," her boss said with a sly smile that made Grace uncomfortable. By evening, she was exhausted. She canceled her plans with Oliver, needing space to process the sudden intrusion into her life. He was understanding, too understanding, which only made her feel worse about pulling away. "This is my normal, Grace," he said softly over the phone. "I'm sorry you got dragged into it." "I just need to adjust," she replied. "It's a lot to take in. Take all the time you need." "I'm not going anywhere." The next morning, a delivery arrived at her apartment, a simple bouquet of wildflowers with a handwritten note. "These reminded me of you, beautiful without trying to be, thriving wherever they're planted, missing you." Oh, the gesture brought tears to her eyes. This was the Oliver she was falling for, thoughtful, genuine, seeing beauty in simplicity despite being surrounded by luxury his entire life. She called him immediately. "Thank you for the flowers. They're perfect." "You're welcome," he said, sounding relieved to hear from her. "How are you feeling today?" "Better. Perspective is a powerful thing." She took a deep breath. "I've been thinking about what you said about this being your normal. I want you to know that I'm willing to adapt. You're worth it." "Are you sure?" "My life comes with complications most people never have to deal with." "I'm sure," she said firmly. "But I need to establish some boundaries. My work is important to me, and I don't want people thinking I'm using our relationship to advance my career." "Of course," Oliver agreed immediately. What do you need from me? They talked for over an hour, working through Grace's concerns and establishing guidelines that would help her maintain her independence and professional integrity. Oliver listened attentively, never dismissing her feelings or suggesting his way of life should take precedence. By the time they hung up, Grace felt more secure in their relationship than ever. Yes, dating a billionaire came with challenges she'd never anticipated, but the man behind the fortune was worth every adjustment. Over the next few months, their relationship deepened. Grace met Oliver's parents, his father, stern but ultimately approving, his mother, warm and immediately welcoming. Oliver became a fixture at gallery openings, genuinely interested in the artists Grace championed and even purchasing several pieces for his various properties. Grace was careful to recuse herself from any sales involving Oliver, adamant about keeping their personal and professional lives separate. Her integrity earned her respect from colleagues who might otherwise have resented her relationship with a major potential client. 6 months into their relationship, Oliver surprised Grace with a weekend trip to his lake house in the Adirondacks, a modest cabin that turned out to be a stunning 5-bedroom retreat with panoramic views of the water. This is your idea of modest. Grace laughed as they pulled up to the architecturally impressive structure of glass and natural stone. Compared to some places, yes, Oliver replied with a grin, helping her out of the car. Wait until you see inside. The interior was a perfect blend of luxury and rustic charm, high ceilings with exposed beams, floor-to-ceiling windows that brought nature indoors, and furnishings that invited relaxation. The kitchen was a chef's dream, which Oliver put to good use preparing a gourmet dinner while Grace explored the property. You cook too? She asked, returning to find him deftly handling multiple pans with professional ease. My mother insisted I learn. She said no child of hers would grow up helpless in a kitchen, regardless of how many staff we had. He flipped a piece of searing fish with a practiced motion. It turned out I enjoy it. It's meditative. They ate on the deck overlooking the lake, watching the sunset paint the water in shades of gold and pink. After dinner, Oliver built a fire in the outdoor pit, and they curled up together on a cushioned bench, wrapped in a soft blanket against the evening chill. I've been thinking, Oliver said, his voice thoughtful as he gazed into the flames. Always dangerous, Grace teased, snuggling closer to his warmth. He chuckled, pressing a kiss to her hair. I'm serious. The past 6 months with you have been the happiest of my life. Grace tilted her head to look up at him. Mine too. I've been thinking about your gallery idea featuring undiscovered female artists. He hesitated. There's a property in Chelsea that my company acquired last year. It's a beautiful space with great light, close to the High Line. It would make a perfect gallery. Grace stiffened slightly. Oliver, hear me out, he said quickly. I'm not offering to give it to you. I'm proposing a business arrangement. You would lease it at market rate but with flexible terms that give you time to build your clientele. I'd be a silent investor if you want, but you'd have complete creative control. Grace sat up straighter, considering his words. You've really thought about this? I have. You have the vision and the talent. You know the artists and the market. All you need is the space and some startup capital. His blue eyes were earnest in the firelight. This isn't charity, Grace. It's an investment in something I believe in you and your vision. I'd offer the same terms to any promising business venture. Would you really? She challenged. Well, perhaps with a slightly higher interest rate, he admitted with a small smile. But the principle is the same. This is a business proposition that happens to align with my personal happiness because it would make you happy. Grace considered his offer. She'd been saving for years, but realistically was still at least 5 years away from having enough capital to open her own space, and Chelsea locations were increasingly hard to come by. "I'd want a proper business plan," she said slowly, "with realistic terms that would hold up to outside scrutiny. Of course, we can have my business team draw up standard contracts, and you should have your own lawyer review them. And I'd want to pay my own way, even if it takes longer. No special treatment because we're together." "Agreed," Oliver said, a smile growing on his face as he realized she was seriously considering it. "And I want to see this space before making any decisions," she added. "We can go next week," he promised, pulling her back into his arms. "Does this mean you're interested?" Grace nodded against his chest. "I'm interested, but I need to make sure I'm doing this for the right reasons because it's a good business decision, not because my boyfriend is offering me an opportunity I can't refuse." "That's why I love you," Oliver said softly. "Your integrity is uncompromising." "One of the many reasons I love you," she replied, "is that you respect that about me." The space in Chelsea was everything Oliver had promised, airy and bright, with the perfect flow for a gallery. Grace fell in love with it immediately, already envisioning where pieces would be displayed and how the lighting could be adjusted to showcase different media. True to his word, Oliver had his team draft standard business contracts with terms that were favorable but not unreasonable. Grace hired her own lawyer, a friend from college who specialized in small business contracts, to review everything. After some negotiation and adjustments, Grace signed the lease on what would become Emergence Gallery. The next 6 months were a whirlwind of activity. Grace kept her job at Luminance while working evenings and weekends to prepare for her gallery's opening. Oliver helped where he could, carrying furniture, installing lighting fixtures, offering advice on contracts with suppliers, but was careful to let Grace take the lead. "This is your vision," he reminded her when she asked for his opinion on the layout. "I'm just the muscle." "Very attractive muscle," she teased, kissing him before returning to her placement diagrams. The night before the gallery's grand opening, Oliver took Grace to dinner at the same restaurant where they'd had their first real date almost a year earlier. The chef greeted them warmly, leading them to the same table. "For good luck," Oliver explained as they settled in. "1 year ago I sat across from you and thought I might be falling in love. Now I know I'll love you for the rest of my life." Grace's heart skipped a beat. "Oliver." He reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "I had a whole speech prepared, but looking at you now, all I can think is how much I want to wake up next to you every morning, to build a life with you, to face whatever comes our way together." Reaching into his pocket, he produced a small velvet box. Grace's breath caught as he opened it to reveal a stunning ring, a deep green emerald surrounded by smaller diamonds that caught the light and scattered it like stars. "Green like your eyes," Oliver said softly. "When you look at me, I see my whole future reflected there." He slid from his chair, kneeling beside her. "Grace Cooper, will you marry me?" Tears filled Grace's eyes as she nodded, unable to speak for a moment. "Yes," she finally managed, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, I will marry you, Oliver Blackwell." He slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, and then stood, pulling her into his arms for a kiss that held all the promise of their future together. The restaurant erupted in applause, other diners catching on to what was happening. "I have one more surprise," Oliver said when they finally broke apart, both a little breathless. "I don't think my heart can take any more surprises tonight," Grace laughed, wiping away happy tears. "This one's good, I promise." He guided her back to her seat. "I've been thinking about the gallery, about your mission to support female artists who haven't had the opportunities they deserve." Grace nodded, her fingers automatically going to the exquisite ring now adorning her left hand. "I want to establish an endowment, the Grace Cooper Fund for Emerging Female Artists. It would provide grants for studio space, materials, childcare, whatever barriers are keeping talented women from pursuing their art." Grace stared at him, speechless for the second time that night. "The fund would be administered independently," Oliver continued. "You could serve on the board if you wanted to, but it wouldn't require your day-to-day attention. It would just ensure that your vision extends beyond what one gallery can accomplish." "Oliver, that's incredible," Grace finally said, "but it's too much." "It's not," he countered gently. "Think of it as an investment in the future of art. And if you're worried about appearances, the endowment would be through my foundation, not directly tied to you or the gallery. No one could accuse you of using our relationship for gain." Grace considered his words. The fund could help countless women who had the talent but lacked the resources to pursue their art seriously. It aligned perfectly with her values and vision. "Okay," she said at last. "But I want to be involved in setting the criteria and structure. It should be about removing real barriers, not just handing out money." "I wouldn't have it any other way," Oliver replied, his face alight with happiness. "You'll make it meaningful." The next evening, Emergence Gallery opened its doors to a carefully curated guest list of art critics, collectors, and artists. Grace had chosen 7 female artists for the inaugural exhibition, each working in different media, but united by powerful perspectives that challenged conventional narratives. Oliver stayed in the background, proud to watch Grace shine as she guided guests through the exhibition, speaking passionately about each artist's work. Her expertise was evident, her conviction infectious. By the end of the evening, 5 pieces had sold, including a large abstract canvas purchased by a major collector known for launching artists' careers. "You did it," Oliver said when the last guest had departed, pulling Grace into his arms. "The gallery is a success." "It's just one night," Grace cautioned, but her eyes sparkled with excitement. "But yes, it feels like a good start." "A very good start," he agreed, kissing her softly. "To new beginnings." The ring on her finger caught the light as she wrapped her arms around his neck. "To us, and all our beginnings." A year later, Grace and Oliver were married in a ceremony that balanced elegance with intimacy. They exchanged vows in the garden of his Adirondack home, surrounded by close friends and family. Grace wore a simple but stunning gown designed by a female designer she had featured in her gallery. Oliver couldn't take his eyes off her as she walked toward him, her face radiant with happiness. Emergence Gallery had flourished, establishing a reputation for discovering exceptional talent. The Grace Cooper Fund had already awarded its first round of grants, supporting 15 artists with not just financial assistance, but mentorship and exhibition opportunities. Oliver's business continued to thrive, with an increasing focus on sustainable development and renewable energy projects. Grace's influence had pushed him to consider the social impact of his investments even more deeply, resulting in initiatives that balanced profit with purpose. They honeymooned in Greece, spending lazy days exploring ancient ruins and quiet villages, swimming in crystal-clear waters, and making love in a private villa overlooking the Mediterranean. Away from the pressures of their busy lives, they reconnected with the simple joy of being together. "What are you thinking about?" Oliver asked one evening as they watched the sunset from their terrace, Grace nestled against his chest. "How different my life is from what I imagined," she replied, tilting her head to look up at him. "A year and a half ago, I was almost hit by a motorcycle. Now I'm married to a billionaire, running my own gallery and administering a fund that's changing women's lives." "Regrets?" he asked, a hint of vulnerability in his voice. "Not one," she said firmly. "The money, the opportunities, they're wonderful, but they're not why I love you. I love you because you really saw me from that first day. Because you respect my independence while supporting my dreams. Because you make me laugh and challenge me to think bigger." She reached up to touch his face. "I love you because you're you, Oliver Blackwell, not because of what you can give me." He turned his head to kiss her palm. "And I love you because you remind me daily what really matters. Success means nothing without someone to share it with, someone who wants the man, not the bank account." "Well, the bank account doesn't hurt," she teased, making him laugh. "Mrs. Blackwell, are you saying you married me for my money after all?" he asked in mock horror. "No, Mr. Blackwell," she replied, shifting to straddle his lap. "I married you for your body." His hands settled on her hips as he grinned up at her. "Is that so? Hum," she murmured, leaning down to kiss him. "And your mind, and your heart, the whole package, really." Their kiss deepened, passion quickly building between them. Later, as they lay tangled in sheets, breathless and satisfied, Oliver traced lazy patterns on Grace's bare shoulder. "I was thinking," he said, his voice contemplative in the darkness. "Again with the thinking," Grace teased, pressing a kiss to his chest. "What would you think about starting a family?" he asked softly. "Not immediately, but soon." Grace propped herself up on an elbow to see his face in the moonlight streaming through the windows. "You want children with you, very much." His expression was earnest, vulnerable. "I've been thinking about it more and more lately. Watching you with the artists you mentor, seeing how nurturing you are while still challenging them to grow. You'd be an amazing mother." Warmth bloomed in Grace's chest. She'd always wanted children, but had put those thoughts aside while focusing on her career. "I'd love to have a family with you, Oliver. I think you'd be a wonderful father, patient and kind, but with just enough structure to keep things from descending into chaos." His smile was radiant. "We'd figure it out together like everything else." "Yes, we would," she agreed, settling back against him. "Not immediately, though. I'd like at least another year to establish the gallery first." "Of course," he said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Whenever we're both ready, there's no rush." As Grace drifted toward sleep in her husband's arms, she thought about the strange twist of fate that had brought them together: a speeding motorcycle, a split-second reaction, a collision avoided that had led to a connection neither of them had expected. One moment had changed everything, speeding up both their lives in the most wonderful way. 2 years after their wedding, Grace gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl they named Ethan and Lily. Oliver was a devoted father from the first moment, changing diapers with the same focus he brought to billion-dollar deals, singing lullabies with abandoned joy, pacing the nursery during sleepless nights so Grace could rest. Emergence Gallery continued to thrive, now with a talented director who managed day-to-day operations while Grace focused on artist development and major exhibitions. The Grace Cooper Fund had expanded its reach, now supporting over 50 artists annually across the country. Oliver's business empire had evolved too, with increasing focus on projects that combined profit with social impact. The success of his sustainable community in upstate New York had led to similar developments in other states, creating models for environmentally responsible living that were both luxurious and accessible. Their life together wasn't without challenges. They navigated the complex dynamics of raising children with privilege while instilling values of hard work and empathy. They weathered business setbacks and family disagreements. They balanced the demands of 2 successful careers with their commitment to being present, engaged parents. But through it all, they remained each other's anchors, partners in the truest sense of the word. 5 years to the day after Oliver pulled Grace from the path of a speeding motorcycle, They returned to the spot where they'd first met. The street looked the same, the morning bustle of New York unchanged. "I still can't believe I almost missed you," Oliver said, his arm around Grace's waist as they stood on the corner. "1 second later and we might never have met. Or 1 second earlier and I wouldn't have stepped off the curb at all," Grace pointed out. "It was perfect timing, even if it didn't feel like it at the moment." "The best kind of timing," Oliver agreed, pulling her close for a kiss that still held all the passion of their first embrace. As if on cue, a motorcycle roared past, causing them both to break apart, laughing. "Some things never change," Grace said, shaking her head. "And some things change in all the best ways," Oliver replied, his eyes full of love as he looked at her. "Thank you for letting me save you that day and every day since." "We saved each other," Grace corrected gently, "and we keep doing it over and over again." Hand in hand, they walked away from the corner where their story had begun. Heading toward the future, they continued to build together a future neither of them could have imagined in that split second, when a billionaire shielded a woman from a speeding motorcycle, never expecting that second would speed up his life in the most extraordinary way.